Thank you. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Measuring Democratic Health from the Classroom. This is a virtual panel on civic engagement, artificial intelligence, and the Democracy Discourse Index. I am Crochelle Harris, the Director of Strategic Projects and Partnerships at the Global Center for Rehumanizing Democracy. This webinar is sponsored by Alt Liberal Arts, a global education initiative concerned with freedom to learn, civic engagement, and advancement of the liberal arts. In collaboration with Bard College and the Global Higher Education Alliance for the 21st Century, Alt Liberal Arts offers free global online lectures and courses for which you can register at their website, which is altliberalarts.org. These lectures would not be possible without the support from the Open Society Foundation and Bard College. While we won't pause for questions during this 90-minute presentation, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen where you can enter your questions or comments throughout our discussion. I will pose your questions to the panelists near the end of our time. Also, this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the Alt Liberal Arts YouTube channel. So let's jump right in. I begin today's discussion with Dr. Margie Ensign, who will share her thoughts on the Democracy Discourse Index. You will hear us refer to it as the DDI. Dr. Ensign is GCRD's board chair and has spent more than 15 years in the role of university president across Africa, Eastern Europe, and the US. So, Dr. Ensign, will you set the stage for us on the importance of the DDI?
Thank you so much, Crochelle. And thanks to Alt Liberal Arts, and particular Mary Ruiz, the chair of Alt Liberal Arts, for her vision and leadership. A big thanks to Bard College and their Global Higher Ed Alliance for the 21st Century for their really critical support. Thanks to our visionary executive director, Dr. Jacob, for his innovative work on the DDI, as well as our panelists of amazing students and faculty who are doing something unique. This last semester, they've combined civic engagement using an AI tool to understand public discourse. What is public discourse? How we understand and speak to each other, whether we think we can make a difference in our societies. Do we have empathy? Do we have trust? Do we have agency? We know it's a critical moment with AI, and I bet all of us have stories about something we've seen or heard that makes us reflect. Very briefly, here's my story. I recently worked an election in Washington as a ballot clerk. And when people came in, I was to greet them and to give them their ballot. And a woman came in and I said, "Good morning, how are you?" She looked at her phone and said, "Oh, it says I'm okay." I said, "Okay, what kind of ballot would you like? A printed ballot, or would you like to use the computer?" And she said, "I was told to use the computer." Honestly, it gave me chills because I thought, who will be telling her who to vote for? So I believe it is that critical moment in the use of AI. It's changing how we work and how we learn and how we play and how we think and how we relate to each other. It's transforming many sectors of society. And of course, there are big risks involved. The environment, personal control, personal agency, lots of things to think about as we figure out how to adapt to this tool. So I believe there are two imperatives that we all need to be thinking about at the moment. As educators, as always, we have a profound responsibility to ensure that this generation and every generation has the knowledge and the skills and the experience and the confidence and the courage to take on the big issues, the big problems of our time. That now includes how do we understand and mitigate the risks and use AI for the common good. So what you will hear today combines, I believe, both of these imperatives, teaching students how to use critical thinking to amplify that with AI and to understand an understudied part of democracy, public discourse. On social media, are we empathetic? Are we civil? Do we trust each other? Do we think we have the ability to make a difference in the world? Democratic discourse. Today's topic is unique and critically important in its approach, and I know we're all going to learn a great deal from listening to the participants. This semester's Global Center worked with universities and students and faculty from the US and Pakistan, Albania, Greece, North Macedonia, and Bulgaria. And in the fall, additional universities from Lebanon and Ecuador will join us. I've had the great pleasure this semester of following some of this path-breaking work, and I know a lot of us, we will all learn a great deal from this discussion. Thanks to all of you for joining, and a big thanks to our participants.
Thank you, Dr. Ensign. Now I want to turn to Dr. Jacob Udo Jacob, the founding executive director for the Global Center for Rehumanizing Democracy. Dr. Jacob, can you tell us a bit about GCRD and the Democracy Discourse Index? Why is the DDI necessary?
Thank you so much, Chriselle. I have a few slides that I'll be sharing to provide as much information as I possibly can do about the Democracy Discourse Index. And in the next 10 minutes or so, I really want to do three things. First, say why we thought the world needed another democracy index. Then secondly, show you what the Democracy Discourse Index actually measures and why and how. And thirdly, share a little of what we've found. The Global Center for Rehumanizing Democracy is a think, act, teach tank, and it was created just about a year ago in September of 2025. And you'll see through this presentation what our mission is and what we seek to achieve around the world. Right. The numbers you see currently on the screen are where we are currently with the Democracy Discourse Index. As President Ensign said, we piloted last semester across 6 countries, 6 universities, and we're expanding to further 4 universities, 8 languages, and so far there have been over 32,000 annotations, more than 200 human coders, and indeed we have 6 observatories that are live at the moment. I should say that it's possible to join me here, and I will be sharing the link to this presentation as soon as I'm done. Right, so VDEM, Freedom House, the Economist Intelligence Unit are excellent instruments, and we're not a rival to any of them at all, but they all work at the architecture of democracy, elections, rights, rule of law, government capacity. None of them tells us what is happening between citizens. And that is where democracies often fail first. Hostility, contempt, the collapse of good faith attribution, the loss of any belief that acting together can actually change things. And those show up in language long before they actually show up in election results or in a democratic crisis. So a question when we started GCRD and the DDI was, how can we measure public discourse? How can we show these indicators or these signs at scale and across languages? There are 4 capabilities, and these 4 are so important, so I'll go through each one of them. First is empathy, as President Ensign said. Whether people recognize each other as human, civility, whether disagreement is governable. Then trust language, whether trust is extended, negotiated, or whether it's withdrawn. Democratic agency, whether people write or speak as citizens who can act, not like spectators that are waiting to be rescued. And each of them has 5 indicators. So this is really how a scoring looks like. Okay, I'll read these 2 different posts. Post A, and you'll find this in one form or the other. It may not be expressed this way, but you'd find it in some form. Post A says, this corrupt elite are destroying our country. Every single one of them is a traitor. Anyone who defends the current system is either stupid or evil. You've seen this expressed in one form or the other. Then post B says, I profoundly disagree with this policy, and I know many families are frightened about what it means. Their fear is legitimate. I believe citizens working together can change this. Now, you don't often see this, but we do see quite a few of them, I have to say, across different contexts, not expressed directly this way, but in some way. That gives us these scores that you see here. Okay, so for here, you see that empathy on the post to the left is 0, civility is 0, trust is 0, agency is a little bit there. But on the post to the right, you can see that the scores there are high. So we're not measuring whether a citizen is right in that sense. We're measuring whether the way they argue leaves democracy something to build upon. And that neutrality is also what makes the instrument teachable and useful across different contexts. And in the fall semester, we will pilot an instrument to identify coordinated disinformation and hate speech. These are the, this is actually what it looks like. There are 20 indicators, and each is scored 0 to 4, and they aggregate into a composite score and a band. And coders also record a confidence rating and can make a dimension that's not applicable they can actually mark a dimension that's not applicable by actually skipping in that dimension. So this is what the bands look like. Most of the scores that we've seen over the past semester is around this region of concerning band. So this is where the AI question gets answered, and I'd like to be precise here. Every post is coded independently by 3 trained annotators, and you'd get to hear more from the faculty and the students themselves. And they share nothing until they have all finished. When they disagree, a faculty supervised adjudication session resolves that problem or that disagreement. And it's only adjudicated labels that are used to train the model. We have a threshold. We use Crupendo's alpha, and the intercoder agreement threshold is 75%. And here's what makes the DDI unusual. It is the reason we have this panel today. The coding is done by faculty supervised student researchers in the countries whose discourse is being measured. And that is a methodological decision, I should say, because irony, euphemism, sarcasm, or coded insult, it's difficult to translate those. Okay. And most of the models that are trained in English language may not be able to spot them. But local coders catch this, and the adjudications are really what teach the model. And we're expanding, like we said earlier, to other countries, so the UK, Ecuador, Lebanon, Ukraine as well, Rwanda, and Nigeria. So currently there are 6 observatories across this that are live across different countries. The score in Pakistan is the current semester, but last semester in Pakistan, the score was just over 60%. And you'd get to see in the links that will provide details of each of the countries. So this is the country scorecard. This is basically what it looks like in summary across the different countries currently. One of the things that you notice here when you look at the right side is where each country is weakest is actually democratic agency, except for the United States. The United States scores fairly well in democratic agency, but in empathy, it is lower than most of the other countries. And you can actually see that here. Again, I'm going to share this link so you can go through the material yourself. So you can see, for example, where the United States is compared with, say, Bulgaria on the agency index. And again, you can do a deep dive into any of the countries. Pakistan, phase 2, for example, the link is there, but again, we'll provide that. So you can do a deep dive into the countries. But you want to take time and have a look at the tab here on the left to see the topic explorer, the heat map, platform analysis, and so on and so forth. Then just take time to explore and see what the students are doing. This is an example of the instrument used against live event in the United Kingdom. And I'm not going to spend time on this, but the link is there so you can look at the research. It's a recent research in response to the new Prime Minister Andy Burnham's appeal, a message to let's bring back hope. And one of the things we try to do at GCRD is to ensure that citizens engage with democracy with renewed hope. So that's why that study is particularly important to us, and we're constantly monitoring his communication and responses to his hope-based communication. The links to the various reports that we've got are also available. And at the end, we'd like to share QR code because we're inviting you, faculty, to look at what we are doing. You can visit our Rehuman lab. That's where we're setting up the research portal. The discourseobservatory.org is where you have the observatory. Then gcrd.org.uk/DDI is where you see the methodology. For faculty intake form, for faculty that would like to join, the QR code is there. And of course, the email addresses that you can use to reach us. So on that note, I would like to hand over back to Chriselle to take us to the faculty members that are doing the real work. Thanks.
Great. Thanks for that background, Dr. Jacob. So now I will invite members of the faculty consortium who helped to launch the pilot phase of the tool to provide some practical examples of how they use the DDI. I'm going to start with Dr. Wajiha Raza Rizvi, who collaborated with the Department of English, Linguistics, and Applied Studies at NED University of Engineering and Technology in Pakistan. She is currently a principal investigator and also one of GCRD's inaugural senior fellows. So, Dr. Rizvi, can you tell us at NED, the DDI is embedded directly in coursework. So was this a required course, part of a project within a course, or something else? And then why did you build it that way? What was the value? What value did the DDI bring to the course? And you're on mute. Unmute yourself, Wajiha.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Rochelle. Thank you, Dr. Jacob, and all liberal arts. Thank you, everyone who is here today, board members and everyone from NED University and other universities around the world. In response to your answer, I would like to say that we embedded DDI in EA 401, Language, Culture, and Identity, which is a course, which is a core course at NED University, and it focused on qualitative work, qualitative research work at the time. So I had a group of senior students, and they were already taking their last courses and were writing their thesis. The chairperson, English, Linguistics and Allied Studies Department, Dr. Saida Zaki, strategically briefed students about the international collaboration. Students were excited about this course collaboration and what we described to them as a 7-country consortium or research project. When I met students first time, Mehwish Arif invited me to start the discussion. I suggested she goes first and discusses the language, culture, and identity as per original course goals or program goals. I built up her argument describing relevance of language, culture, identity, political processes, democracy, and critical discourse to everyday life and speech. We discussed, which means I and students discussed DDI's 4 dimensions, how they reflect in our daily speech and communication, if they have any impact on our overall well-being, our rights and achievements. Among empathy, civility, trust, language, and agency, the agency was a bit tricky. Most students were getting exposed to it for the first time. We were exposing 30 girls and 3 boys in our classroom to their own democratic agency, as well as women's agency, in response to one of the DDI's topics that included gender, besides activism, social cohesion, elections, governance, and climate. Our students were exposed to secondary research before I started teaching them. They were exposed to literature review and supporting argument. Global Center for Rehumanizing Democracy, or DDI, actually exposed them to primary research, instrument coding findings, and evidence-based brief writing. So we can say that this integration introduced triangulation of research methods to the original qualitative research course. One more thing that I would like to add, that we introduced Democracy Discourse Index with a different methodology and had different goals. DDI's course integration goals were same for the 7 countries during the spring and summer editions. And when they get updated, they are updated for all the countries. So NED students were already exposed to discourse analysis. What we brought to them was critical discourse analysis, coding on a 0 to 4 scale, numbers and figures, consensus building, and intercoder reliability. We exposed students to collaborative online learning and gave them an opportunity, which in its format was ditto in the 7 countries. So DDI provided 7 country students an opportunity to achieve similar goals before seeking opportunities of international or transnational education in future. So our classrooms were not just Freudian in terms of exchange of knowledge between students and teachers from Pakistan, but also they provided us an opportunity to interact with faculty members from 7 countries. And NED students intend to compare findings of Pakistan on certain topics with findings from Albania, Bulgaria, or another country. So we tested and offered internship also. This was another experiment. In addition to the course integration, we deliberated, experimented, and tried different ways of university teaching and learning. We upgraded Pakistani students' learning free of any standard Higher Education Commission approved course requirements. We in fact took them forward. We introduced our first cohort to professional practice before they graduated from NED University in spring 2026. Those graduates can now use DDI knowledge for their well-being and careers. We also offered internship and professional skills, as internship was free of regular requirements. And it was also within the program's goals. So I would say that actually Pakistani students and NED University students have tremendously, achieved, they have benefited from this course. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate that. I now invite Dr. Juliana Chefeku, an associate professor of applied linguistics, corpus linguistics, English language teaching, and communication studies at Fan Esnoli University in course in Albania. So, Dr. Juliana, can you tell us, Albania is one site that is running the DDI entirely outside of coursework as a non-credit bearing co-curricular activity. So why did you choose that model? And was there a trade-off against embedding it in a graded coursework?
Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I thank the Alt Liberal Arts for giving us the possibility and inviting us in this online webinar. I thank Professor Jacob, Rochelle, and all the faculty members, the students that were part of this journey, which was adventurous, challenging, interesting, up to date with what we are living and facing in today's world problematics. And this was a great chance for me to present my country, my university, as principal investigator in this DDI pilot project. And the novelty of this project was that my students, the team that we raised together. It consisted of 15 students, but not only being part of one subject or one faculty or department, but it consisted of an interdisciplinary kind of team where students were part of 4 faculties and they worked together as a team. The good thing is that they did is that apart from the other colleagues which had their students as part of their subjects, these students and I built a virtual classroom where we had our meetings, our collaborations, our trainings guided by Professor Jacob and all the faculty members. And in a way, we had this classroom, but it was not within our institution, but it was a virtual one, which at the end managed to have the same results, just like our colleagues had with the students working and operating within their classroom. So why did we have this kind of co-curricular activity with the Albanian students? We thought that it is better that to see themselves this democratic competence, which is developed throughout the engagements from the students' part with real-world democratic issues, rather than through classroom instruction alone. It created greater flexibility for our students working under the DDI concept, priorities, trainings, and guidelines that they needed to have this project fulfilled at the end. But it was also going in line with the students' interest and institutional context, because this kind of project was addressed to them as a necessity for the community, for the time that we are having these problems, and they themselves decided to be part of this project, even though it was not part of a course assessment and being graded or having the credit just like in other subjects, but they thought that this was an issue that would interest to them as civic people, would interest to the society, to the governmental issues that Albania now is facing right now, and their ideas, their critical thinking is a kind of weapon and something that will attract people's attention and the government's attention so that they reflect and do the changes, because what comes from the people should be the priority of every kind of society. So this model transformed our students from passive learners into active researchers, and it gave them the ownership of the research project and the findings. They saw the findings themselves, because throughout their critical thinking, their cooperation, collaboration, how to deal with issues which demanded critical thinking, and it demanded a kind of balance in judging throughout the indicators, they themselves decided what was best. So they negotiated and critically thought the best solution to the thinking, to the discourse that came from our culture, from the people. So it's best to have this kind of ideas and critical thoughts when you have the output that is coming from your people, and you are the ones who will judge the reality as it is. And this gave the right and the ownership to our students by strengthening their critical thinking, the civic agency, the digital literacy, and the collaborative problem solving. So living beyond the curriculum, this experience demonstrated that meaningful democratic learning can flourish outside credit-bearing courses. And Albania, we were happy to be the ones to provide this kind of model, which can be embraced by all kinds of internships, all kinds of subjects whose motto is to deal with democracy, with the issues, with the people's rights, because this is a way that makes people and makes students free to participate by encouraging their intrinsic motivation rather than engagement driven by grades or assessment requirements. Because in this phase of this project, they were dealing with real-world democratic issues, and they were moving beyond theoretical learning to practical research and civic problem solving. So what our students differently in a co-curriculum activity, what they did is that they actively, guided by their interest and desire to give their critical thinking views and sharp views against what is happening even right now, even in the world, by collecting, by analyzing, by interpreting, and discussing democratic discourse. So developing, once again, research and critical thinking skills without the pressure or formal assessment. So what they did in the end, they came at the same situation with the same priorities and principles that the DDI wanted from these students all over the world, was to come to the end with these critical insights, valuing what is happening in our country, and at a later phase, they are going to make contrastive analysis among the countries that were part of this project. So thank you. This was my viewpoint concerning the two questions, Crystal.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, we will hear from Dr. Panagiotis Paskalidis, an assistant professor in the Department of Journalism and Mass Communications at Aristotle University at Thessaloniki. I really wanted to try to get that out, in Greece. So will you tell us, Greece has its own recent history with institutional trust and populist mobilization. What's been the biggest methodological challenge in adapting the DDI's coding scheme to Greek language discourse specifically?
Yes, thank you very much, Corsel, for the question. And please allow me first to thank the organizers of the event, the Alt Liberal Arts, and of course, our audience from all around the world. And certainly the Global Center for Rehumanising Democracy, for the leadership, Professor Dodo Jacob, and everyone involved from the other universities, investigators and students, of course. It's an honor for me to participate in this program representing Aristotle University and the Department of Journalism. And of course, for today, it's an honor to share this time with you. Regarding this question, which is very important for the Greek context, I would like to begin with a general remark and explain why I think DDI's contribution is very timely as regards, of course, Greece. So far, in Greece, of course, we had a rise of populism and a lack of a decrease in institutional trust as a result of the severe economic crisis, the recent one. And so far, the literature, the scholarly work has focused on political parties, politicians, political discourse. There is a lack of attention when it comes to public discourse and the view of the citizens. This is why I think DDI comes very timely to offer this view. Of course, with the use of AI, with coding, with critical discourse analysis, but there's so much data that are being produced from the project that I'm sure that we will revisit, and even in more qualitative ways, and focus on discursive and linguistic aspects of how such important phenomena like populism, political mobilization and participation are manifested in the discourse of the citizens in social media. When it comes to Greece and the challenges when it comes to applying the DDI methodology in our case, I would say that perhaps they are shared, these challenges, by other countries as well. But we did struggle at times with our students in trying to overcome these challenges. I could refer to four distinct issues. The first one, I think it was how to dissociate phenomena such as sarcasm, irony, the use of political slang, or perhaps more specific elements like historical references and innuendos from literal coding. For instance, to quote one of my students, one time she asked me, it was she asked me, this post seems to be polite, but there is the use of one particular word which makes it, gives it a completely different meaning. To give you an example, it had to do with flip-flop, and in the Greek context, we have a lot of terms for that mean the same thing, a flip-flop, so or a turnaround. So these were common challenges for our students. That was one aspect. The second was, which is a bit more complicated perhaps, is how to distinguish criticism from distrust, because in the DDI methodology, which was very valuable as guidelines, we had to provide a scaling that had to dissociate constructive criticism, which is very beneficial, and it's not necessarily the lack of institutional trust, with, of course, dissociated with the actual lack of trust or the complete rejection of the system or many institutions of the system. So this was another difficulty, because that was also a problem that the students faced. If there was once more the use of a certain terminology that revealed this complete rejection or distrust towards institutions, political, economic, and so on. This was another thing that created problems. I think in this case, the solution was the scaling, and they could move towards one pole or the other, but it took some time to adjust to this aspect. The third one, which was of course equally demanding, was the way to distinguish between something that was absent or non-applicable when it comes to the post that we were coding. For instance, this was the case with democratic agency. And in Greece, Professor Udo Jacob, in the results, perhaps you noticed that in Greece there was also very low finding of democratic agency. And many times the students had an issue of how to deal with this absence. Many times it was the choice of skipping this post and not code. And another quote from one of my students was that I feel bad that I have to skip democratic agency. I wanted democratic agency to be more present in the social media posts from X, but it isn't. So I just had to explain. Don't feel bad. Feel bad perhaps as a citizen, but feel good about yourself as a researcher, because you have to be honest and systematic when it comes to coding. That was another demanding aspect of democratic agency, but I think we also try to adjust and move forward. And the last one was, of course, the sometimes elliptic nature of social media posts. And in this case, the question from the student was, what is the ideal length, or what is how a post should be in order for us to code it properly. And once more, I reassure them that this is not your problem. This is the mirror of public discussion as it takes place on social media. So don't feel that you're being examined or judged about this. Work with what you have. An elliptic post is an elliptic post. You cannot add something in order for you to code it. So these were, I think, the biggest challenges when it comes to applying the DDI methodology in Greek language. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you for that. So now we're going to turn to our fourth faculty member, Professor Versi Sham. He is Professor of Practice and Program Director of Social Innovation and Social Entrepreneurship at Tulane University School of Architecture and Built Environment here in the US. So, Professor Shalom, how did you prepare students to code discourse I laugh because I'm living in this context. So from a highly polarized political environment without flattening their own views into the coding?
Thank you very much, Michelle, for the introduction. First, I'll say one of the first things that worked for us in our class was our course is pretty unique. It's highly multidisciplinary. And so we incorporated the DDI project into understanding complex systems course. And so in the structure of the course, originally students were study social complex systems. And so looking at all of the social complexities in society, and they group themselves into various groups on looking at specific wicked problems. And so in this case, we had 5 wicked problems that students were looking at already. And so aligning the DDI coding process into these was pretty very seamless in the sense that we're looking at how democratic discourse impacted social complex problems that they were looking at. Of course, it didn't align subject matter specifically, but they were looking at a broad spectrum of different ideals or different conversations that were being had online. But I'd like to say that neutrality doesn't mean not having any views. And so we didn't ask the students not to have any views. What we asked them to, what we did working with the DDI, Professor Jacob and his team, was to create a structure that prevents students' views from becoming the score. So their biases didn't have to be put into the way they scored. So in those group of 3s that they were coding in, their adjudication forums were very critical to ensuring that students, whether their biases slipped into their coding, when they got into those adjudication sessions, they were able to see where, to determine whether this code, what I specifically coded this particular post, whether less civil or toxic, did they actually reflect the baseline across all 3 individuals in the group. And so that education session has helped students identify their own biases as well, and having conversations not just within the small adjudication teams, but also in class, discussing that helped to eliminate that to a great extent. And so, for instance, we had a situation where a student was in a group that had to do with AI, had very personal and ethical concerns about the use of AI regarding environmental impact, data centers, energy costs, and work, and all of that. And there was a post that she had, ranked to be toxic in a sense. And her teammates or her group members kind of, came forward and said, "Hey, you might be looking at this from the lenses of your own personal views rather than the fact that this is a post that was for AI, of course, but it was not divisive, it was not toxic, it was just stating its impact and strongly making a case." And so the student was able to see that, okay, at this point, I'd gone beyond being fair to actually coding in my bias in this particular instance. And so that was a very good, the education forums were very good to help catch that. And then, given the fact that we're coding, trying to answer the question about how online discourse or discourse influences social wicked problems, the indicators versus the position of the students. We allowed students to have a position on these issues, but the idea was to say, hey, how does the position of the post or the post itself, how does it address the problem, rather than whether you think it is toxic or not? The person who posted this address the problem in a civil way? Whether you agree with their position or not, or that is not the case, did it address it in a civil way? Looking at it from that perspective, students were able to really come at it from a more social complex problem scenario rather than their own personal bias or divide, especially like you said, in a polarized environment where people are taking sides for whatever reason just because they think this is the right position to take. And so we're able to, within the context of the class, the setup of our course, help students remove themselves and their own personal biases from these scenarios. And then the third aspect to it was the fact that they were looking at a broad array of posts, not just posts that were specific to their areas of interest. So they were looking at posts that really they didn't even know what the individual who posted was talking about, or had nothing to do with anything that they were interested in. And so just giving the broad array, the broad corpus of posts allowed for students to stay on task rather than being politically polarized by their own views as they went through. And so we were not training them to be neutral. We were training them to notice the moment that their own convictions was doing the scoring rather than the fairness of how to adjudicate it accurately. I believe that really worked in helping to limit the polarization impact, the external factors or influences that the current political climate in America could have had on them.
Okay, great. That's informative. And it's a really nice segue because now I do want to turn to a couple of students to talk about their experience. So we have two students who participated from their respective universities. I'm going to start with Redina Skinderi. She's a first-year political science student at Fanes Noli University in Albania. So Redina, will you tell us about your experience with the DDI?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the introduction. I want to thank all the participants. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I'm honored to speak on behalf of the students from Fanoli University who participated in the Democracy Discourse Index project. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my experience here. So I can say that my experience with DDI has been both challenging and rewarding. During the training, I learned how to evaluate democratic discourse using a structured and evidence-based methodology, and I became familiar with 4 core dimensions of the DDI: empathy, civility, trust, and democratic agency, and learned how to apply these indicators objectively. So one of the most valuable aspects of the project was that it pushed me to think beyond simply reading online content. It encouraged me to look more critically at how people communicate and to evaluate the quality of democratic discourse. So the structured methodology helped, and that project helped a lot in developing the analytic and critical thinking skills. So as well, it helped me to have or to pay attention more to the details. At the same time, the experience made me realize how complex online communication really is. So language can be difficult to assess objectively, and especially when context, tone, and different ways of expressing ideas come into play. So I also realized that no methodology can capture every aspect of human communication perfectly. So because the context always matter, and for me that was an important lesson. Let's say analytic tools are really important and extremely valuable, but they need to combine with the human judgment and evaluation, and we should carefully pay attention to the context. So I found this especially interesting, I can say, because it showed me that technology can support the research process while human evaluation is always essential. So the project also gave me valuable experience in teamwork and in research, I want to say, because discussing different cases, or talking with other coders and helping in conclusions that we have done made that process more confident. And I can say that overall, the Democracy Discourse Index pilot project reinforced my interest in political science and showed me that the importance of evidence-based research in understanding democratic and public debate. So that was very important. And more importantly, it changed the way I look at online communication. And today, as I said, I pay more attention to not only what is being said, but also to how it is communicated and what it means for the democratic dialogue in general. So I'm very grateful to have been part of this project, and I appreciate the opportunity to have shared my experience here today.
I actually want to take a moment, Regina, to give you a follow-up question because it's about the training. So after your initial training on how to use the tool, what surprised you most once you actually started the scoring of posts against the DDI dimensions? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. What surprised me the most, I can say that it was how much complex the real-world coding was compared to some training examples. So during the training, the examples were relatively clear and straightforward. But however, once we started evaluating real posts from X, I realized that political communication is often much more nuanced. So many posts include sarcasm, irony, emotional language, or cultural references sometimes. So that can make it difficult to interpret so the author actual intention. Another thing that surprised me was that the 4 dimensions do not always move together. So a post can be highly civil on one side and respectful, while still it doesn't say that it's the same about the institutional trust or the other dimensions. So I can say that that taught me to evaluate each dimension independently. So instead of assuming that a good post would automatically score well across all categories, I also found the discussion among coders to be one of the most valuable parts of the project, as I said. So sometimes we assign different scores, and that's normal because we judge subjectively to some posts because each of us interpret, like I said, certain comments, reviews differently. So rather than seeing that as a problem, we discussed our reasoning, referred back to the coding guideline, and let's say we left behind our personal opinions and behaved objectively. And I can say that I realized how important, in conclusion, I realized how important constancy is in research. So every score contributes to overall data set, and so being objective and applying the same standards to every post is essential for producing reliable results. So I can say that it requires analyzing and collaboration. That's the most important. So this is probably the most valuable lesson I have taken from the project, and what was surprising for me.
Okay, that's great. That's great. I appreciate it. Now I'm going to turn to our second student. So Sabulna Imran is an English linguistics graduate from Ned University of Engineering and Technology in Pakistan. So Sabulna, I want to ask you, DDI coding is done independently in terms of in teams of 3 students. So what happened when you and a fellow coder scored the same post completely differently?
Hello,
Yes, I can hear you. Go ahead.
can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you so much. First of all, it's really a privilege to be here among all the panelists and all of you. So, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so your question that coding is done independently. So that's a very important question because this agreement between coders is actually a normal part of qualitative content analysis. So in our project, coding was intentionally done independently by each member of the 3-person team. This helped ensure that every coder approached the tweet objectively without being influenced by others' opinions, right? So when we encountered a tweet that received completely different scores, we didn't immediately try to convince each other that this is okay or this is not right or you haven't done it right. Instead, our first step was to go back to the coding manual and the operational definitions for each indicator. So overall, we revisited the criteria and asked ourselves that whether our assigned scores are truly aligned with the guidelines or they are not. So after that, after reviewing the manual individually, we held a discussion where each coder explained that the reasoning behind the scoring, that why they have done this or why they have scored their tweet like that. So the focus of the discussion wasn't on personal opinions, but on the actual evidence present in the tweet. For example, if one coder assigned a highly empathy score while another assigned a low score, both would point to specific words like phrases or tone or context in the post, so that supported their interpretation. This ensured that our arguments remain evidence based rather than these are subjective. You know that sometimes we can code subjectively, but we ensure that our arguments are evidence based. So many disagreements occurred because of differences in interpreting tone, sarcasm, or implied meaning or context. But during these discussions, we carefully distinguished between what was explicitly present in the tweet and what might have been our own assumptions. So yes, that was it. Overall, this all experience had a highly qualitative research dependence, not only on independent analysis but also on transparent discussions. It depends, right?
Let's do a follow-up on that. So, because it's always good to hear if students are able to take something they learned in the classroom into real life. So, do you think that kind of thinking or practice in coming to a resolution is something that you now have learned how to use in other aspects of your studies or your life or engaging with people?
Yes, of course, of course. I mean that we really learn how to resolve issues, or we really learn how to not judge anyone or any tweet or anything on the basis of subjective interpretations, but also we knew the criteria and we knew how to resolve. I mean, after I graduated, I learned how to resolve my problems in my real time problems, my real life problems with some with some discussions and with not to have disagreement of my team. So it really helped in my real life.
Thank you. That's good to hear. It's really good to hear. So thank you both for giving us like the student insights. I want to turn back to the professors, the faculty members for a moment. But for the audience, I ask that you please remember that you can enter your questions or comments throughout our discussion by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Let's see. So now I'm going to go back to, Dr. Rizvi. What are some of the early findings from your Pakistan cohort that surprised you or unsettled you the most? Unmute yourself.
Yes, you can. I hope you can hear me now. So I would refer to climate discourse that only showed in Pakistan on combining data of the first batch of 12 groups in March 2026. It was a finding as it did not significantly show in other countries at the time. It was mixed, but you can say near healthy, remaining between 67.4% and 73% from March to May 2026. It is still in the highest, bands in the second phase. So the lowest, what surprises me is the lowest score. It's the public institutions and accountability score, and also democratic agency, which is lowest when you talk about any of the topics. So you can say that corpus-wide democratic agency is very weak in Pakistan, and if, for both international affairs and institutions. But what most unsettled me was the reversal of, you can say, Pakistan's image from a generalized post 9/11 rhetoric, Muslims are terrorists, to becoming a peacemaker during the Iran talks in the first quarter of 2026. Osama bin Laden's special and temporal relationship to Pakistan and Afghanistan had exposed me and my family to, certain types of security checkups during international travel. So when Pakistan's image totally reversed in 2026, I think it was great, because you can see that in this period, trust score was constantly increasing, while trust score was increasing and was above 70%, democratic agency was still below. It was much, almost 20% difference. You can say it was at 51. So you can say trust, language, and civility increased, and they alternated for the top position. But democratic agency was still very poor. It looked like people were very cautious of what they were saying, and they did not really talk like change makers. So that was something that was quite surprising for me. So in terms of public discourse, I would say that the first cohort, because we have conducted 2 phases of research, the first cohort examined 3,600 tweets on X platform, which were mostly in English. And when we in phase 2, we analyzed digital media, like multiple digital media platform comments, and we analyzed 4,001 comments in English, Urdu, and Roman. So this was very different. The rhetoric is different and offers a different kind of civic engagement and register. The second cohort, batch 8, particularly invited, rush reactions from India, which were less seen in case of Twitter, but for the first phase was focusing on Iran talks, what happened around the time of 8th batch. Just 2 weeks back, you can say that was some security action that took place in Kashmir. So DDI exposed students to neutral coding, research and analysis. Students have written policy briefs on different topics. If the first cohort reflected more on civic activism, social cohesion, gender, and climate, the second cohort has reflected more on elections, governance, international relations, and gender and social justice. They have even written on religion, values, and culture. So the topics were different. So we can say that they have also they are well exposed to navigating topics, issues, and complexities, written evidence-based policy brief, interpreting results, etc., which are all in interest of Pakistan. So you can say that by the time that students completed their training in both phases, they had learned a lot. They are introduced to professional practice. So I would say that Dr. Jacobs and DDI and GCRD's frequent interactions with students, they have benefited students tremendously in terms of learning about methodology and writing techniques. And I would say that this DDI has actually furthered students' interest in democratic discourse and what happens in Pakistan generally. So I would think that there would be better citizens in future, and they will be more, they will bring more to Pakistan in future also.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. I'm now going to go to Dr. Paskalides. Greece will hold local elections in the coming months. So how can DDI help Greece monitor and understand its highly complex public sphere?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Koshel, for this question. Well, we don't know. The elections may be held in the autumn, maybe early next year, but they are coming. We are approaching the election time. And of course, once more, the discussion will be monopolized or dominated by polls, surveys, who is leading, who the demographics, the issues, the agenda, and so on. And from the social media, of course, perspective, the strategies, macro targeting, different strategy for a different platform. These are, of course, expected and all very interesting. But the DDI contribution can be critical in the case of Greece and raise the issue of democratic communication. Do we have a healthier communication, discussion, discourse in the public sphere this time, comparing, of course, to previous times? This is a very important aspect that the DDI may contribute, of course, and the plan is to continue the analysis in the coming months and include, of course, the electoral period, because there will be, once more, there will be assessments in the likes of the polarization is increasing, tribalism is increasing, but this won't be very helpful when it comes to understanding and evaluating, assessing democratic discourse. What does it mean? What does this mean for the citizens, for the way they communicate, for the trust in institutions? And I think all the dimensions of the DDI will help in providing a very thorough assessment of all these elements. For instance, are citizens becoming less civil towards their opponents or the other citizens? Are they losing trust in institutions? And also very important, I think for me, is the combination of the dimensions. For instance, does an increase in institutional trust always or most of the times includes an increase or high levels of civility and empathy? Or can we have, for instance, a rise of democratic agency without a rise of institutional trust? We will hopefully we will be able to determine the positive or the negative correlation between the dimensions. This would be, I think, very revealing and very critical for assessing the electoral period and the elections themselves, of course, the climate when it comes to discourse. And if I may, particularly for Greece, because as I mentioned a bit earlier, judging from the results that we have, this, of course, a preliminary interpretation. The democratic discourse in Greece, perhaps it's not so toxic as one might expect, and civility and empathy and even institutional trust are perhaps concerning, but at least they're in the middle of the scale. But the crucial thing is to follow and monitor democratic agency, because the lack of democratic agency, I think, shows that we have a political expression, we have political engagement, but without or with a lack of political or democratic empowerment. And of course, at this stage, I cannot fully interpret this result, but for me, it will be very important to continue to monitor and perhaps correlate it with other elements like the participation, the abstention when it comes to voting and other variables. But this gap between political expression on the one hand, which we have in Greece, for instance, we have expression, we have intensity, we have discussion, but without agency, it means for me that we don't have empowerment. We have disenchantment, a very acute one, I might add, and this is something that the DDI will not only measure, but it will open a very important discussion for democracies as we move deeper into the social media era. Thank you.
You're welcome. Some of that juxtaposition is also what we just heard from Dr. Rizvi in Pakistan. So it was good to hear you bring that up. But you thinking about elections also makes me think about the fact that the US will have elections coming up, even though it's sort of what we call a midterm, it's turning out to be quite pivotal. So I'm going to turn back to Professor Shom. So the US is already one of the most studied countries for disinformation and polarization. But what value does the DDI add to understanding public discourse in the United States? What did you find from working with your students in this area?
Thank you very much for that question. One of the most interesting things about our experience here in the US, working with DDI, especially in the class with the students, is that uh, one question that we sought to answer, or we kind of like our design question, was is the US polarization really more pronounced than other countries? Or if not, what exactly is at the root of it all? And I think what, as a group of, as a class, my students were able to uncover and learn specifically was the idea of US polarization isn't necessarily, polarization in the US, political polarization in the US isn't necessarily more intense than in other countries. However, the unique scenario where the US sits is what we were able to uncover. It is structured, democracy in the US and democratic freedoms in the US are structured slightly differently. And one of the things that we're able to identify was that the two-party binary in the US, where conservative and liberal ideals are basically the two major things or political ideals that are in place, allows for or does not necessarily allow for a middle ground per se, even though people do still have a very centralized, or should I say, cross-party ideals or political identities or preferences to issues in the US. However, given the US's unique position, where the media is a huge industry and does play a big role in kind of exacerbating or amplifying a nationalized media market around these political ideals or identities, it further seeps into society. And then with the advent of social media, that became even more amplified. So it might seem on the outside as though the US is extremely polarized, but uniquely it is as a result of very key factors, which is the US First Amendment constitutional protection that allows for freedom of speech. This makes it easy for discourse to really go any direction. And the US does not have specific filters like other countries around what constitutes hate speech or not in that sense. And so people are able to express themselves much more freely. And so you might see in some cases that speech that might be considered hate speech outside of the US or even within the US itself still has a place and can be deliberated and stay online for a long time, and it influences people's perspectives and ideals. And so these are some of the things that we're able to find just working with the DDI. Students were able to expose themselves to this idea that the US is a highly polarized political space. But in truth, it is just what is projected out there that as allowed by the constitutional laws that open the space for everybody to have an opinion and every opinion to be listened and captured, that makes this much pronounced. And given the US's huge role or position or influence globally, both from a social, political, military, trade perspective, it allows for US discourse to filter into other societies. And thus, the feedback loop there is that, oh, the American space is really polarized. What we found out was that there are very moderate views. There are also very civil discourse in the US that is going on. However, some of the factors that I also listed earlier, like the media and both traditional media and social media, amplify some cases the more polarizing aspects of discourse online more than others. And this goes further in what we were able to really understand in our class, influencing how social or wicked problems in America, complex problems, are either resolved or not resolved, because these conversations are amplified in such a way that it looks like people are totally polarized, and thus there's no middle ground. And therefore, the average American whose voice might be more moderate about certain issues, or maybe even a majority, a silent majority that have a more middle ground, and not having the visibility that the media and social media in this case are projecting out there. So it becomes very difficult for these complex social problems to be addressed specifically. But I think that overall, what we were able to understand is that freedom of expression in America is, I think, at the highest level around the world. And thus, if you want to measure civic discourse or political discourse in America using the yardsticks that are in place in other countries, for instance, in Europe or any other part of the world, it might look as though America's civic space is more polarized or political space is more polarized than others. Whereas what is actually happening here is that there is a more larger and wider spectrum of conversation that can be had, and means of expression that people have the right to do. Rather, so measuring the US against other countries might not necessarily be giving the US a fair ranking of its actual political space, just because it has a larger spectrum than most countries. And that was something that was very, very interesting for us to uncover as we had these conversations and dug deep into the coding and relating it back to our own personal individual projects in the class. And as students did their research, they were in some cases very surprised to find out that that is actually the case. But overall, it was quite a fulfilling experience to just know that this is what is at play.
Okay. Thank you for that. Thank you. So finally, just before I open it up to questions, we have just a few questions that have been posed. I do have a sort of roundup question for Dr. Jacob, one additional question for him. So for faculty members and university administrators who are watching this discussion, this presentation, and they're wondering whether to join the consortium, especially as we are now approaching the fall semester, what is the one thing you would want them to know?
That's an interesting question. The one thing I'll want them to know is that this is an experiment, and it's a way of having their university engage with their society using discourse. And what we're experiencing, as we've listened to from various from students and faculty, is that it's a tool that's useful to the class, useful to the students, also useful to universities. So it's an instrument for civic engagement, and it's also a way really to expose students to research and maybe ideas that normally wouldn't be part of the regular curriculum. And so my submission basically is that it's something that they should feel free to try and experiment with. You're muted, Chriselle. Chriselle, you're mute.
Thank you. Sorry, that time I was at fault. So I'm going to go to a question for you, Dr. Jacob. And this question is really pointed because it's going to allow you to come back to talk about GCRD's overall posture of being sort of a think, act, do organization. So the question is, when introducing a real-time framework like the DDI to a country like Pakistan, where political environments can be highly polarized, which we've heard about, what is the most strategic way to approach government stakeholders? How can we successfully frame this tool so that institutions view it not as a critical grading metric or penalty sheet, but as a proactive, data-driven early warning system for policy and social cohesion? And this is from one of the students, Maria, who's at Ned University in Pakistan.
Excellent question. We want this tool to be useful to governments and to civil society organizations, to universities and various actors out there. We are not, I have to say, a government agency, and we won't try to back down on data if it's critical. But the instrument is designed to surface what may not necessarily be there yet in opinion polls. I'll give an example. In the case of Albania, when we started monitoring Albania early this year, one of the things that we noticed was that of all the topics that we were monitoring, one topic stood out. That was climate change and the environment. People were generally quite empathetic on topics that pertained to climate change, and there was high democratic agency with that. And a few months later, when we started seeing the protests in Albania and people using flamingos as a symbol of protest, it was not surprising at all to us, because we had seen those indicators 2 months or even more before it manifested on the streets. So it's an early warning tool in that sense that governments can actually find really useful. Civil society organizations as well can find this useful. But back to your question, Maria, it's we're fully minded to engage with governments in that sense, because we want governments, democratic governments, I should say, to be successful. We want citizens to engage with renewed hope, like I said earlier, and we want to have that instrument that we can show to society, to government, civil society as well, that look, this is what your democracy looks like on the streets. This is what relationships look like. And in that sense, we're keen to engage with government. For Pakistan in particular, we were looking potentially at having a high-level policy dialogue that would include state actors and other research agencies that are there. We've already published a research paper about our findings in Pakistan, and we're confident that it's useful.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. I want to come back to Dr. Juliana for a second, because you presented this model that's like the co-curricular model. And because I know our audience is probably largely academia, is there anything that you can talk about from the co-curricular model that you think the coursework or internship model was missing? Or perhaps something that you would suggest being incorporated going forward if folks choose to use the same model that you did?
Thank you again for giving me the floor to proceed with your questions. Yes, the co-curricular model was fostering a new model against the internship or any kind of curriculum assessment that might be given in different courses. The model that I transmitted to these students, which were virtually connected and collaborating with each other by having a look at or mirroring what the other faculty staff was doing in their subjects. Even the students that I have incorporated in this team, they had done different communicative, democratic subjects because they are engagements that they should go through in all the faculties. So communication is the basis for all kinds of professions that these students are going to have in the future. But what related this and made this model unique against the other models that the faculty members presented to their courses and their students was that it fosters intrinsic motivation among these students and their civic commitment without having the necessity to being graded or to have credits within a specific subject, because what they dealt with were real democratic issues, which, as Professor Jacob stated, anticipated what happened later after 2 months that the project we had finalized, and the findings that that came out from the students' codings and the briefs that they did for their critical and sharpness of viewing what was happening or what came out from the community itself, from the discourse that people fluently and spontaneously were giving their ideas on different issues that pertain to our culture. This was the result of what is actually happening in Albania, and it came out from the people and from the students. It came out from the higher education, where the students, guided through research, guided through AI training, they saw what this digital literacy represented from their people. So what was missing in this kind of dialogue or transmission was the civic agency, the democratic agency that came out from the students' codings, which were right, which were transparent, which were collaborative. When they have this kind of ambiguities how to code or to judge things, but what came at the end was, as Professor said, it anticipated, because every kind of movement, every kind of challenge, everything that people want will come from them. And transmitted by higher education is a good way, is a bridge that links knowledge, that links novelties throughout technology, but even the people's thoughts and ideas, how they feel that these changes should be done. And by engaging all these participants and parties in this kind of research, because indeed it was a research, but in our case, it was independent, it was guided by the students' interest, where they engaged as collaborators and contributors, not just as simple learners completing an assessment. So they felt by necessity that they could learn, they could identify themselves with their peers around the world, with countries that had problems, even though they forecasted what would happen in Albania a few months later. So I think that this kind of model should be engaged or used as a good one, because it presented our students in this case as ownership, having different interdisciplinary commitments, but what they linked was their engagement, because they dealt with real societal challenges as seen later in Albania. So when these students that pertain to higher education showing or facing or being tutored, as we had in anticipation, by some specific guidelines and tutorials and ways of thinking, by following the way how they should code this corpus to our country and the faculties to the other countries. So by following the same line, having this worldwide instrument as it is DDI, which is a pilot in this moment, but it resulted that it gave reliable outcomes and findings, because it was based on sound critical thinking and evaluation from the students. So coming from the students, which are part of the community. So not being in the political or governmental position, you can clearly think and express your opinion that will serve to the community and to the people. So their coding show that when public conversations shifted toward transparency, institutional responsibility, which is something that they found out from the discussions and what people thought freely, the quality of democratic discourse would improve significantly. And this is what people, even throughout this protest, are looking for. So they want civic engagement, they want their voice to be heard, their thoughts to be heard, so that democracy realizes its scope. So everybody should be equal to express his ideas, but even to be heard and to have an impact, which means to leave a place for change when it is needed for our society. And this is what our students did as young researchers. They prevailed what was coming next. And I think that they gave specific and sharp ideas and findings on what the reality in a democratic country is and how it should be in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. So we've reached the end of our time. I want to thank the audience for attending the webinar. I want to thank my colleagues, both at GCRD and the faculty consortium. And especially thank you to Art Liberal Arts for hosting us today. To learn more about GCRD, please visit the website. I included the link there in the chat. And also do visit altliberalarts.org to stay up to date on upcoming events and news. All offerings are available free of charge. You could also view past webinars, like I said before, including this one on the Art Liberal Arts YouTube channel. So goodbye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.